Welcome to our free training of the CDL pre-trip inspection. Now, why is New Jersey one of the hardest states to get your CDL in right now? The main reason why the test is so hard is because many examiners do not have a CDL license, which means that the pre-trip inspection is not based necessarily off your knowledge, but more off vocabulary. The examiners are looking for a specific vocabulary in order to give you the proper points. That's just how they were trained. So where do they get the vocabulary from? It's simple, the CDL manual. So we develop our training program around the CDL manual. If they want the words, we're going to give them the words that they want. We also have to be knowledgeable enough to understand what the items are and how to identify them. So in this video, I'm going to be doing a walk-around inspection just as if it was test day for me. So please pay attention to the words that I'm using and follow along. We're going to be doing an entire vehicle inspection, even though I must let you know that during the test it's very unlikely that you're going to have to inspect the entire vehicle. There's a few different forms of the pre-trip inspection, and the examiner will decide which form you're going to be taking. Now, we don't train you on Form A, Form B, Form C. We like to give you knowledge on the entire vehicle because in that way you are prepared. So today we are going to perform an entire vehicle inspection, so no matter what they throw at you, you should be prepared to pass this test. So come on in and follow me, and we're going to get started. Alright, so if we're doing a full vehicle inspection, we're going to start off with the front of the vehicle. I like to work my way from the top down, so just listen to me and we're going to follow along. On the top we have what we call clearance lights, and for our clearance lights we have to say that they are clean and functional. Because they are clearance lights, we are going to have to talk about the color, and they are amber in the front. If we move down, we're going to have our windshield. So our windshield has to be clean, free from any damage, has to have no obstructions and no illegal stickers. We also, on our windshield, we have our wipers. So our wipers, arms and blades must be secure and they must operate smoothly. Okay? If we follow on down, so like I said, if we follow on down, we're going to have our headlights and turn signals, and they are also clean and functional, okay? Now, also underneath, we're going to be checking for puddles on the ground. We do not see any puddles on the ground. And that covers everything for the front part of the vehicle. According to the book, we do not have to talk about the grille or the bumper or anything like that. A lot of people give you extra information that is not needed. So let's follow me. We're going to open up the hood and we're going to inspect the engine. So when we're inspecting this engine, and again this is a max force engine on an international, we are going to be, first thing we're going to look for is going to be, I'm going to inspect all my hoses. Make sure my hoses are all in good condition and make sure that they are not leaking. Okay. I'm also going to check the floor again, make sure there's no puddles on the ground, and there's also no dripping fluid on the underside of the engine or transmission. From here, I'm going to check my oil level, which is this right over here. This is my dipstick. I'm going to indicate where my dipstick is located. I'm then going to pull it out. I'm going to make sure it's in safe operating range by being above the refill mark. Next thing I'm going to check is my power steering fluid. So my power steering fluid, my dipstick is on top right here. Again, I'm going to pull out the dipstick, make sure that it's adequate level by making sure it's above the refill mark again. Now, as I move down here, I'm going to have my power steering box, which is right here, called the steering box. Here, I'm going to make sure that it is mounted securely and not leaking. Make sure it's not missing any nuts, bolts, or cotter keys. And all the hoses leading to and from this power steering box is also in good condition and not leaking. Okay? Inside the engine here, it's kind of hard to see, but just again, like I said, listen to the vocabulary. This over here is my alternator. So my alternator is belt driven. It is operating properly. It is not damaged or leaking, and it is also mounted securely. Because it is belt driven, I am going to check the belt to make sure that it has no more than 3/4 inch of play, and it also has no cracks or frays. My air compressor is in the back over here. My air compressor is gear driven, so it is operating properly. It is not damaged or leaking, and it is also mounted securely. And then on this side also I have my power steering pump, which is underneath here, which means that that is also gear driven it is operating properly, it is not damaged or leaking, and it is mounted securely as well. So on this side of the engine, like I talked about, it's hidden. This vehicle might be a little bit different than the vehicle you might be taking for the test, but on this side we do have the alternator, the air compressor, and the power steering pump, which is the driver's side on this Max Force engine. On the other side of the engine, we're going to have our water pump, and I'll show you that in a little bit. But there's only one other thing inside this engine that we have to talk about, which is a little bit lower down. So like I said, there's one more piece on this engine, which is my steering linkage. This is my pitman arm, my drag link, and my tie rod is in the back. It's a little tough to see, but here I have to make sure that my arm, link, and rod are not worn or cracked. My joints and sockets cannot be worn or loose, which are where they connect, and they're not missing any nuts, bolts, or cotter keys, which are on all the joints. Alright? So that completes my engine for my driver's side. Now we're going to go over to the passenger side and check the engine out there. So now we're going to inspect the passenger side of the engine. And again, like the last time, we're first going to start off with all the hoses. We're going to make sure that all my hoses are in good condition and not leaking. Again, we're going to look for puddles on the ground. We're going to make sure that there is no dripping fluid on the underside of the engine or transmission. So on this side, we only really have two items to inspect other than your hoses, which are your coolant level. So my coolant level, I'm going to inspect my reservoir sight glass, which is a clear plastic right here that I can see. I can see it's at proper level. If the engine was not hot, I would have removed the cap and checked the level from the top itself. But in most cases, you'll be driving the vehicle to the test, which means that your engine in most cases is going to be hot, so do not remove the cap. Also on this side, we also have our water pump, which is belt driven as well, and that's found in the middle of the engine over here. And pretty much what we have to say about that is my water pump is belt driven, it is operating properly, it's not damaged or leaking, and it is mounted securely. Because it is belt driven, we do have to check the belts again to make sure that they are no more than 3/4 inch of play at the center of the belt, and they also have no cracks or frays. So that concludes our inspection on the passenger side of the engine. So now we're going to move on to the wheels and the suspension. So now we're going to move on to the wheels, suspension, and brakes. And this is something that many people find difficult for the simple reason that it's very hard to locate these things on some of the axles. But just follow me. So this is the suspension right here. Right here is a leaf spring. So when it comes to our leaf spring, we have to make sure that they are not missing, shifted, cracked, or broken. Over here are our U-bolts. These are bolts that look like a U. We have to make sure that they're not loose, missing, or broken. They also have to be checked to make sure that they are properly mounted and secure to the axle itself. Over here we're going to have our shock absorber. So our shock absorber cannot be leaking and also has to be secure. If we come in closer, on the top and the bottom of the shock absorber we have what we call our bushings. So our bushings cannot be missing, they can also not be damaged. And on the front and on the back of the leaf springs, we have leaf spring hangers, which is this item right here. It's pretty much what your spring hangs on. So our leaf spring hangers cannot be cracked, broken, or damaged. Alright? And that covers everything for the suspension for the first axle. So next we're going to talk about our brakes. The first thing about our brakes is our brake chamber, which is right here. Now our brake chamber cannot be dented, broken, leaking. It also has to be mounted securely. This right here is our slack adjuster and push rod. Our slack adjuster is this piece. Our push rod is the bar that goes inside of the brake chamber. Now our slack adjuster and push rod cannot be missing any parts. Can also not move more than 1 inch with the brakes released. That means if we release the parking brakes and chuck the tires, we would not be able to move this more than 1 inch by hand. If it does move more than 1 inch, that means your brakes are out of adjustment. On top of the brake chamber we have a brake hoses, lines, and couplings. So our brake hoses, lines, and couplings are not worn, cracked, or leaking, and they are in good condition. Now the other two items with our brakes are found behind the tire right here. It's a little bit difficult to see, but this outside piece right here, this is your brake drum. Okay, so your brake drum cannot be cracked, dented, cannot have any holes, cannot be missing any nuts or bolts, also cannot have any contaminants such as oil, debris, or grease. And this brake pad looking thing over here, this is your brake lining. See, brake lining should not be worn dangerously thin. And that covers everything for your brakes. So when it comes to our tires, there's a lot of different things we have to check. For instance, this is a steering tire, which means that we have to make sure that there is at least 4/32 of an inch in tread depth on the tread itself. We're also going to want to make sure that the tread is evenly worn on the top and there's no cuts or damage or chunks missing out of the tread or sidewall of the tire itself. Okay? As we move down here, we're going to want to make sure that our rim is not bent, damaged, cracked, or has any welding repairs. Our lug nuts are also going to want to be checked. We have to make sure that our lug nuts are present, they are free from any distortions or cracks, and they also have no rust trails or shiny treads. Rust trails or shiny treads would indicate looseness. So the reason that would happen would be that if there was a space in between, water would get in between the lug nut and the rim, and rust trails would start showing through. Shiny tread means that the lug nut was not tight enough, and it started vibrating, and then it started shaving some metal off. Also, for this tire itself, we're going to have to check the valve cap and stem. Most people forget about this guy right here, but here we have to make sure that they are not leaking, not cracked or damaged, and mounted securely over here. We're also going to want to check the tire pressure with the tire gauge. Okay, the tire pressure for this tire should be about 90 to 100 psi. Okay. And now in the center here, we're also going to have our hub oil seal. Our hub oil seal that cannot be leaking any oil, and it also has to be filled to adequate level. And that covers everything that you have to say for these front tires. Now remember, you're going to have to say this exact thing for all your suspension, all your brakes, and all your tires, whether you can see these items or whether you cannot. So on every axle, you're going to have to mention all these items. So follow me along as we continue our full pre-trip vehicle inspection on our international truck. So now follow me as we continue on with this vehicle pre-trip inspection. So as we continue on to the side, we've already done the tires. We're then going to check our mirrors. Make sure that our mirrors and mirror brackets are secure. They're not missing any nuts or bolts, and they have no loose fittings. These are my steps. Make sure that our mirrors have to be solid, clear of any objects, and also secure to the frame. My fuel tank is secure, my cap is on tight, is not leaking from the tank or the lines. My door, I have to make sure that it is not damaged. I have to make sure also that it opens and closes properly. I have to make sure that the seals are intact and the hinges are secure. Okay? As we move along throughout the vehicle, I have another set of steps right here. Again, I have to mention that they are solid, clear of any objects, they are secure to the frame, and they're good. My catwalk is on top right over here. I have to also make sure that that is solid, clear of any objects, and secure to the tractor frame. Now this is my tractor frame member right here. I'm going to make sure that the frame and cross member on my tractor has no illegal welds, has no holes or damage to it itself. Okay? Now we're going to follow up this side, and we're going to be checking the airlines next. Now our airlines are very important, okay? So these are air electric lines that we have to talk about. Blue is for service, red is emergency, and green in this case is my electrical line. So I have to make sure that all my air electrical lines are not chafed, cut, spliced, or worn. I have to make sure that my electrical line is not showing any steel braids, okay? I also have to make sure that my lines are not tangled, they're not dragging against any tractor parts, and they're in good condition. They're also not leaking, okay? Over here are my air electric connectors. This is part of the trailer itself. So I have to make sure that they are secure and all locked in place. I also have to make sure that my air lines connectors, which are my glad hands, are secure, not leaking, and locked in place as well, and have no damage. My electrical plug, which is right here, has to be firmly seated in place to make sure that everything's okay, and make sure that everything's not going to fall out during a trip. Okay? While we're here too, we're going to be checking the header board. Now the header board is the front part of the trailer. We have to make sure that there is no bulges, cuts, or damage, or holes to the header board of the trailer to make sure that it can enclose the cargo securely. Now we're going to follow me underneath the frame and we're going to be checking things like the drive shaft. So in between the frame, we're going to find our drive shaft, which is this long round metal piece right here. Now our drive shaft cannot be bent or cracked. The couplings, which are those U-joints right there, have to be free from foreign objects. I also have to check my exhaust system. This is my exhaust. I have to make sure that I check it to make sure that it is secure. It is not leaking. Any signs of leaks would be carbon soot or rust. I have to make sure that it is tightly connected and everything is tight and secure on my exhaust system. Like I said before, this front part of the trailer is called a header board. This is where we inspected the air electric connectors as well. My header board has no holes, bulges, and it can properly secure the load. Well, they call these vehicles 18-wheelers for a reason. You've got a whole lot of wheels. What does that mean? We have to inspect it all over again. Like I said before, every axle must be inspected. So I have a dual drive tires right here, which means I have 2 sets of dual tires, okay? So I'm going to check the same way I check the front with a few minor changes. These tires back here cannot have any less than 2/32 of an inch in tread depth. My tread has to be evenly worn. There has to be no cuts or damage to my tread or sidewalls of my tire, okay? As I go down, again, I'm inspecting all my tires the same way. My rim cannot be damaged, bent, or have any welding repairs. As I go down even further, all my lug nuts have to be present, secure, and free from any distortions. Even my bolt holes have to be free from distortions. My lug nuts cannot show any signs of looseness, such as rust trails or shiny treads. My axle seal back here also cannot be leaking and also has to have adequate fluid level inside of it. I'm also going to have my valve stemming cap, which are right here. They cannot be missing, damaged, or leaking. And my tire pressure here is also going to be checked with a tire gauge, and these tires have to be anywhere from 90 to 100 psi as well. So that covers all the tires back here, but it doesn't cover what we can't see. Now, if you can imagine, this trailer is staying on this tractor during the test, which means you're going to have to commit to memory exactly what kind of suspension you have back here, what kind of brakes you have back here, unless you want to get yourself dirty and crawl up underneath here, okay? But lucky for you, I'm wearing a nice shirt, and I don't feel like getting dirty. That being said, let's talk about our brakes. So our brakes are exactly the same as the front axle. What does that mean? We have 5 different brake components. We have our brake chambers. They cannot be bent, damaged, or dented. They also cannot be leaking. We have our slack adjuster and push rod, which means that they cannot be missing any nuts or bolts or missing any parts, and they cannot move more than 1 inch with the brakes released. We have our brake hoses, lines, and couplings, cannot be worn, cracked, leaking, or damaged. We have our brake drum, which cannot be missing any nuts or bolts, also cannot be holes, damaged, bent. It also has to be free from contaminants such as oil, debris, and grease. And lastly, we have our brake lining, which in our brake lining cannot be worn dangerously thin. And that covers all our brakes. And again, that's checked on both sets of tires because you have brakes on both sets of tires right here. Okay? Now we go into our suspension. Now our suspension is a little bit different than the front. We do have all the same components, we just have to add 2 more things. On our suspension here, we're going to first start off with our spring hangers. So our spring hangers cannot be cracked, damaged, they have to be secure. We're then going to have our leaf spring. Our leaf spring is not missing, shifted, cracked, or broken. On this back axle, we have what we call a torque arm. So our torque arm cannot be missing, damaged, also has to be securely mounted. Okay? If we do have a leaf spring, in the middle of that leaf spring, we have U-bolts. So our U-bolts cannot be loose or missing any U-bolts, and they also have to be secured to the axle. Okay? Back here, we're going to have our first example of an air ride suspension, which is an airbag. Okay? We're going to call it an air ride suspension for the test because that's the way it's worded in the book, and that cannot be damaged or leaking. We also have another spring hanger back here for the back end of the spring, which you say the same thing, not cracked or damaged or broken. And then we're also going to have our shock absorbers, which cannot be leaking, have to be secure, and our bushings cannot be missing or damaged. And that covers everything right here except one, which is our mud flap. Now our mud flap cannot be damaged and it has to be securely mounted. That covers all these tires right over here. I must confess, I did forget to mention one thing, which is because we do have dual tires, we have to talk about our spacers. Our spacers must be evenly centered with the dual wheels and tires evenly separated. They must also not be bent or damaged or rusted through. You're going to see an example of this once we get to the back axle of the trailer. Hey, who turned out the lights? Wait, there they are. We're actually underneath the trailer right now and looking to inspect the fifth wheel, as you can see right here. So there's a few different items on the fifth wheel that they expect you to know. The first thing is the locking jaws, which is that bar that goes across in the center there that's shining, and that has to be locked around the kingpin. The skid plate also has to be properly lubricated, also has to be secure, not missing any nuts or bolts or pins to the platform. The platform has to be secure to the frame, also cannot have any cracks or damage to the platform itself. Next, we're going to have our trailer apron, which is the bottom piece of that trailer. Have to make sure it's not cracked, damaged, or broken. The kingpin in the center cannot be bent, and then there also cannot be any gap in between the fifth wheel, skid plate, and the trailer apron itself, which there clearly is not. Other than that, we're going to have to check the release arm, which is on the side of the fifth wheel, and that's going to be how we release the locking jaw from the fifth wheel. For our release arm that's found on the side of the fifth wheel, we're going to have to make sure that it is in the engaged position and the safety latch is in place. Also, because this is a sliding fifth wheel, we're going to have to mention that it is sliding, but all the pins are in place and bolts are in place, which means that everything is secure. Now, while we're down here, we're also going to be checking these tail lights. Okay, so we're going to have brake and signal lights back here, and these, like I said, have to be clean and functional. This is another license plate light over here, and this also has to be clean and functional. So like I promised you, I was going to show you a fifth wheel that's not hooked up to a trailer, and this is what a fifth wheel actually looks like. This top piece is called the skid plate. It has to be properly lubricated, like we said. The locking jaws would be found in between here, and that has to be locked around the kingpin. And this right here, this is your release arm. So like I said, your release arm has to be in the engaged position with the safety latch in place. And this right here is your platform. The platform has to be secure to the tractor frame without any missing nuts or bolts. It has to also have no damage or cracks on it as well. So this is what a fifth wheel looks like in the daytime with no trailer on it. Hey, next we're going to talk about our landing gear. Now our landing gear has to be fully raised, okay? The support frame has to be secure without any cracks or damage, and the crank handle also has to be secure. It cannot be just loose around like this. It has to be in a secure position, just like so. Alright, that covers your landing gear. So now, as we continue down the side of the trailer, any reflector tape that we see, or clearance light that we see, we're going to have to say what? Clean and functional. Those are the two words to say to any lights, reflectors, reflector tape. Okay? Now, what you might be dreading again, what do we see? Some tires. That's right. So we are going to have to check those last sets of tires before we can move on to the last part of the pre-trip inspection. Alright, so our lovely tires are back. So we're going to have to mention just exactly the same way we did it for those drive axle tires. So the first thing we're going to say is my tread is evenly worn, has no less than 2/32 of an inch. My tread and sidewalls have no damage, bumps, or cuts to the tread or sidewalls, okay? My rim itself is not damaged, is not bent, and has no welding repairs. In the back here, we call this an axle seal, again. It cannot be leaking, and it has to be adequate fluid level inside here. My lug nuts are all present. They're not cracked or distorted. They have no signs of looseness, such as rust trails or shiny tread. And now in this hole over here, we're going to have our cap and stem. So we're going to have to make sure we check that, make sure it's not leaking, and make sure it's not damaged. Okay? We're also going to have to check with the tire gauge that we have to make sure that all tire pressures are 90 to 100 psi. Okay? Now, back here we do have dual tires again. So our dual tires, we're going to have a spacer in between to make sure that our spacer is not damaged, it's not bent or worn, it's not rusted through, it's evenly centered with the tires evenly separated. Because remember, the last thing we want to hear is that your tires came on fire because they were rubbing against each other. Not a good way to start your day. Back here, easy enough to see, we're going to have our mud flap or splash guard, as I said in the book. This cannot be damaged, and it also has to be mounted securely. Now, the only thing that we did not talk about are your suspension and your brakes. So, your brakes again, my brake chambers cannot be dent, cracked, or broken, or leaking. My slack adjuster and push rod cannot be missing any parts, cannot have any more than 1 inch of play with the brakes released. My brake hoses, lines, and couplings are not worn, leaking, or cracked. My brake drum is not dented, cracked, or holes, has no damage, is free from any debris such as oil or grease, and my brake linings are not worn dangerously thin. Now back here we're going to finish off with our suspension, and our suspension is our leaf springs cannot be missing, shifted, cracked, or broken. Our spring hangers cannot be cracked or broken. Our U-bolts are not missing any nuts or bolts, and they're securely mounted to the axle. Our bushings are not missing or damaged. Our shock absorbers are not leaking, and they are securely mounted. Our air ride suspension is not leaking and is not damaged, and our torque arm is not damaged, and it is mounted securely. And that is this back tire axle. Now lucky for you, this trailer only has 1 set of tires. You don't have 2. But that covers everything. Before we move any further, I really want to tell you what this little hole is. Now this hole is called a door tie. A lot of people forget that this hole is even here. Now the reason they call it a door tie is because you tie the door to this notch right over here. It's very important that you tie your door tie properly when you are backing into a dock, or else by the time you get done with it, you might not have a door because it's going to be swinging open and closed. So don't forget, door tie is secure. Now when we come to the back of the trailer, now you can finally start breathing because you're almost done with this full pre-trip inspection, right? It's been a long way, but we're almost done, so don't give up on me yet. So what we're going to do here first is we're going to check our trailer doors, make sure they are not damaged. Our trailer doors have to open like so. They also have to close and latch properly. Okay? While we're back here, we're going to check our door chains, which are these items right over here. Our door chains have to be secure. And then we're also going to check our reflector tape on the trailer itself. Clean and functional. Say it with me. Alright? Now we're going to have our brake and signal lights, which are on the side right here. Again, these are, you guessed it, clean and functional. In the center on this trailer right here, we're going to have our clearance lights. So our clearance lights also have to be clean and functional, but because they are in the rear, we're going to have to mention that they are red. Okay? And that covers the back of the trailer. Look at that. You're done. Well, that's it. That's a whole pre-trip inspection. I hope we added value to your time, and I hope you did enjoy this video. I know if you did enjoy this video, you'd really enjoy being one of our students, because our students get this video and much, much more. They get a word-for-word script on exactly what to say for the test. They get to practice on this test truck before they actually go for the test, and they are 100% prepared by the time they go for their test. So don't let a few words be the difference between passing and failing your CDL road test. The proper training is the best way to get all your goals accomplished. Here at Driving Academy, we're here to help you any way that we can. Give us a call if you want some more information about some of our courses. We do have classes starting every single Monday, but call us quick because they do fill up fairly quickly. Thank you, and I hope to see you in person soon.